I am going to start this video by saying something that you probably do not expect. The biggest mistake we make when growing peppers is watering them as if they were tomatoes. And yes, both are summer vegetables, both love the heat, and both produce for months. But when we talk about water, they function in a rather different way. In fact, I have seen many pepper plants stop growing for weeks, drop all their flowers, or produce very little simply because of a watering mistake. And the worst part is that many times we do not even realize it. We think they lack fertilizer, we think they have some disease, or we even come to think that the variety is bad, when in reality everything starts with something much simpler: water. Because the pepper is a very curious plant, it does not like to be thirsty, but it does not like excess moisture either. And above all, there is one thing it hates above all else: sudden changes. So, do you have to water it a lot? Do you have to let it get a little thirsty? Why do peppers suddenly stop growing? Why do the flowers fall off? And why do some people have huge plants loaded with fruit while others barely produce anything? Today we are going to understand how pepper watering really works, what happens when it lacks water, what happens when we overdo it, and above all, what is the big secret to having healthier plants and producing many more peppers throughout the summer. Because when you understand how water works for this crop, many problems that previously seemed like a mystery begin to disappear. If you have grown tomatoes and peppers in the same garden, this has surely happened to you. Summer arrives, you turn on the irrigation, and you water everything exactly the same: the tomato plants, the peppers, the eggplants, everything at the same time. It seems completely logical, but this is where one of the most frequent errors in pepper cultivation begins. Even though tomatoes and peppers look a lot alike, they do not manage water the same way. The tomato is a plant capable of developing a very powerful root system. Its roots can explore quite deep in search of moisture. Therefore, when the soil dries out a little, the plant can often still find water. The pepper is different. It also develops good roots, but in general, it has a shallower root system that is much more sensitive to changes in moisture. This has a very important consequence. It tolerates watering errors poorly, and above all, it struggles much more to recover once it has suffered stress. That is why something curious often happens. Two plants receive exactly the same amount of water, the tomato plant continues to grow without a problem, and the pepper stays stuck for 1 or 2 weeks simply because it has suffered a small amount of stress that the tomato plant was able to endure much better. This completely changes the way we understand watering, because the goal is no longer solely to provide water, the goal is to keep the soil as stable as possible. With tomatoes, we already talked about stability, but with peppers, even more so, without long periods of drought, but also without excess moisture. And here appears what is, for me, one of the great keys to this crop. Burn this phrase into your mind. The pepper does not want a lot of water, the pepper does not want a little water, the pepper wants stability. Because when the soil stops being stable, the plant starts making decisions, and some of these decisions directly affect our harvest. For example, dropping the flowers to the ground. There is something that is incredibly frustrating when we grow peppers. The plant looks beautiful, full of flowers everywhere, and suddenly, a few days later, you look at the ground and they are all fallen there. The first reaction is usually always the same: it lacks fertilizer, it needs more potassium, or maybe it has a disease. But many times the real culprit is something else: stress. And water has a lot to do with this. To understand it, we have to think of a plant as a small factory. Each flower is an investment. The plant needs energy, water, and nutrients to turn that flower into a pepper. But when the plant detects that conditions are not good, it starts saving resources, and one of the first things it does is get rid of some flowers. It is a survival mechanism. The plant thinks, I do not have enough water, it is too hot, I am not going to be able to feed all these fruits. So it makes a decision, it reduces production and lets the flowers drop. That is why we often see huge plants full of leaves but with very few peppers. The plant has simply decided that it cannot carry the entire harvest forward. For this, we also have to do some good pruning. I will leave a video about pruning here in case you are interested in seeing how it is done. Furthermore, the pepper does not need to go several days without water for this to happen. Sometimes a sudden change is enough. A soil that was humid and suddenly dries out too much, a heat wave, a few days of very dry wind, or even an excess of water that can produce the same effect because the roots get stressed and the plant goes back into survival mode. That is why some people say, my peppers bloom a lot, but they do not produce. Often the problem is not in the flower, it is in the stress the plant suffered a few weeks before. But here comes the curious part of it all. The flowers are not the first things to suffer. Before it starts dropping them, the pepper had already given us several warning signs, and most of us did not see them because there is another consequence of water stress that usually goes unnoticed: the pepper stops growing, and that is precisely what we are going to see now. There is an idea that we repeat a lot in the garden. The pepper is a summer plant, and it is true, it loves the heat. It grows better with high temperatures than many other crops, but there is a very important nuance. The pepper loves the heat, but only up to a point, because when temperatures start to skyrocket, the plant starts to have problems. This explains many things we see in summer: plants that stop producing, flowers that fall off, fruits that barely fatten, or peppers that seem to have suddenly stopped. It all starts with something very simple. The plant begins to transpire a lot. Just like we sweat to cool down, the pepper loses water through its leaves to try to lower its temperature. But there comes a time when the heat is so intense that the plant begins to defend itself, and here something fascinating happens. It partially closes the stomata, the small pores on the leaves. The plant tries to lose less water, but this comes at a price: less carbon dioxide enters, photosynthesis decreases, sugar production slows down, and the whole plant begins to work slower. That is why there are days of extreme heat when it seems like the garden has stopped, and it is not just a feeling. The plants are actually functioning at a completely different pace. In fact, in many areas, peak heat hours are more damaging to the pepper than a brief episode of cold because they can directly affect flowering and fruit set. This explains something that many of us have experienced. August arrives, the plants are huge, full of leaves, but barely any new peppers appear. It is not always a fertilization problem, many times it is simply too hot. This brings us to a very interesting question. So, after seeing all this, what do you advise for watering my peppers? Here I am going to leave you 7 tips that have changed my pepper cultivation. First, do not be afraid to water. Many times we hear that the pepper wants to be thirsty, and it is true that it does not like excesses, but it is not a plant that enjoys suffering either. A pepper that experiences continuous stress produces less. Second, use mulch, straw, leaves, or any organic matter. Mulch keeps the soil cool, reduces evaporation, and makes it much easier to maintain the stability that the pepper loves so much. Third, do not copy someone else's watering schedule. It does not matter if they live in your same town, it does not matter if they have the same variety, every soil is a world of its own. Learn to know yours. Fourth, during major heat waves, do not worry if the plant seems more stagnant. Many times it is simply surviving the summer. When temperatures become milder again, growth usually starts up once more. Fifth, if one day you overdo it a bit with watering, do not try to compensate by leaving the plant without water for several days. Extremes are usually worse than the mistake itself. Go back to normal gradually. Sixth, observe the flowers. The flowers are one of the best indicators of the state of the pepper. When a plant starts dropping them, normally something is telling it that the conditions are not ideal. And seventh, and probably the most important of all, be patient. The pepper is a plant that sometimes seems stuck for weeks and then suddenly undergoes a spectacular change. Therefore, often the best advice is not to touch too much, do not change the watering every 2 days, do not start constantly adding products, and simply let the plant work. Because the longer I have been growing peppers, the more I realize one thing: often the best results come when we manage to do something very simple: keep the plants calm. Before finishing, I would like you to hold on to one idea. The pepper does not need perfect watering, it does not need miracle products, and many times it does not need us to be constantly changing what we do in the garden either. It needs something much simpler: healthy soil, stable conditions, and a little bit of patience, because when we achieve that, peppers usually respond in a spectacular way. I truly hope this video has helped you better understand how this wonderful plant works, and that this season you get an even better harvest than the last one. If so, you would help me a lot by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It seems like a small gesture, but it truly helps a lot so that YouTube recommends this content to more people and we can keep growing together. And if you want to go one step further and actively support the channel, remember that the option to become a member is also available. With your support, I can keep investing in new products, tools, seeds, irrigation systems, and all kinds of tests and experiments that I then share here with you in the most honest way possible. You will also have early access to new videos and other improvements. In the end, each video, each test, and each new garden project is also thanks to all of you who support the channel. So whether you are a member, subscribed, or have just spent some time here learning with me, thank you very much for being on the other side. Remember, a good garden always starts beneath our feet, so keep your feet on the ground, and until next time.